This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland one of the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Joseph Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including FanDuel Sports Network without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. Well, the rematch did not go as expected. Ain't no love in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma City Thunder took care of business against the Cleveland Cavaliers, coming out strong in that first quarter and just did not let up. Joining me today is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, brother, that wasn't fun.
Nope.
You get your first ass kicking of the year. Normally, it doesn't come, 40, 39 games in, or whatever it is, or 40 games in. Sorry, but it happens. Would you like it not to happen in this context? Absolutely. The Cavaliers are no longer the sole holder of the best record in the NBA, despite being 34-6, which is bananas. And I just thought it was. We were talking just a little bit before we went live, and I just keep going back to you don't fall down by 40 points in the third quarter if just one thing isn't going well. So
Right.
I've got notes, but it was a pretty collective failure on a night like tonight.
Yeah, it is, right? You're completely right. In order to fall down by that many, pretty much everything has to go wrong. And I think that is absolutely fair when you talk about this game. I think some of what we've seen in this game as well, things that went wrong, are things that we've also kind of seen bubbling up recently. And I think things like ball security has been an issue for the Cavs recently. I think their defensive structure and integrity hasn't been as strong as it has been in the past. And, those are issues that you can't really have against the Oklahoma City Thunder. When we went into that game in Cleveland, we talked about how it really was kind of a true test for the Cavs, who had done such a great job of taking care of the basketball, on whether or not they would be able to still do that against the Thunder, if they would be able to keep the game in the half court. And I feel like the first kind of point of failure when you're talking about this game is that they weren't able to do that. I thought they just were not strong with the ball, even simple things like handoffs, just the crispness of their execution wasn't there. And, it's frustrating because everything that they didn't do right in this game is things that we've seen them do well in other matchups. We have seen them, this really is the first kind of showcase game, the first kind of marquee game where they weren't in it, right? Even that game where almost everything went wrong in Boston, that was a 3-point loss. That was a game that you had a chance to come back and steal. This was the first where they lost their grip of the rope and weren't able to regain it. So it doesn't give me, kind of the macro panic, but I do think that there are things that they need to iron out. And I think it also illustrates kind of the context that this team is working within, where, we've seen them execute against longer teams, physical teams with length that really pressure you at the point of attack. But the reason they succeeded in those previous matchups was because they had such a strong attention to detail. They took good care of the basketball. They were crisp with their execution. And their margin for error when it comes to dealing with teams like that is smaller than most. And I think that this is one of those games that kind of highlights, hey, it's something you can do, but this is also a reminder that you have to take care of all the little things if you're going to be able to bridge that kind of length gap that you have with some of these teams.
Yeah. And I just thought the general, it's tough when you're not playing, when your effort level isn't great. It's tough when your attention to detail isn't great. It's really rough when neither are good. And I just don't think either were good. There were a lot of, Thunder got every loose ball. The Thunder turned the corner on every drive. They blitzed and got to space first every time. And, you're going to get more deflections that way. if they are beating you to the spot you're trying to get to and knocking you off balance and making you take that extra step wider on the pick and roll attack or on a handoff, well, then you're just opening up more space for that ball to get knocked away. So, like, I just thought, I think sometimes when you turn over the ball, like, in an embarrassing way, like I thought this game kind of felt embarrassing, from a turnover perspective. Yep. Like, I think there's a general appeal to focus, and that is not a bad appeal. Like, they should not throw the ball into the hands of the opponent. But, like, I do think it belies a lack of crispness in the rest of their motion, in the rest of the way they were attacking. You look at a guy like Evan, who the hallmark of his season has been catching and attacking with decisiveness. First time all year, he was bringing the ball back down to his waist on catches. I'm
glad you noticed that as well.
Just a lot of like, the processor was slow. The movement wasn't crisp. So, like, the passes get harder.
It was almost like, and Jared was a lot better in his minutes. It was effective in the time that he was out there with the opportunities that he was given. But it did kind of seem like, hey, they don't have a lot of length out here, so I can kind of bring it down. And I take my time going up, where OKC wasn't giving you that time. And when we were going into the first matchup and talking to Andrew, we talked about the difference between defensive approach, where the Cavs, at least to that point, their shell defense was fantastic. How they performed in the half court was really, really great. Whereas OKC really is going to push you at the point of attack. And I thought that they made the logical adjustment of, hey, Hartenstein's out. We obviously don't have Chet either. This is a team that has a lot of size. We're not going to be able to sit back in the shell and just kind of, count on our base defense to get the job done. Let's just disrupt things. Like, let's go out there. Let's really put pressure on them. Let's contest every single handoff. Let's contest every single action they have and try to blow it up. And, this also ties into another trend that we've seen, like going back to the loss against Indiana. Up 15, Halliburton's out, take your foot off the gas. The defensive intensity slips, and you let them not only back into that game, but it ends up being a comfortable win for Indiana. We've seen this when other teams are missing guys, that we don't always approach it with the same level of intensity that we have approached other matchups. And I think we thought it was going to be a little easier than it was with Hartenstein out. Like, this is a team that has played through injuries before. Like, they've dealt with missing him for part of this season. Like, OKC has won in a lot of ways. They are absolutely a championship contender. That is, one of the better teams, one of the better defenses when you talk about how they perform compared to league average that we've ever seen. You cannot have a lackadaisical approach against them. You have to be operating at the peak of your powers if you're going to, win a game in Oklahoma City, of all places.
Yeah, you got to be crisp. And that was just, that was the least crisp game of the season by a mile. And I do think the process, the shape of what they were doing against OKC in the first 6 minutes was pretty good. The game was close. They weren't hitting, but they were getting pretty clean looks. Mm-hmm. There's certainly, I think you could still accuse a lack of sharpness in that beginning. That, the second the process, once they got off script a little bit, everything fell apart. But, like, I thought they were okay. I just thought
and even, sorry to cut you off, but I just want to hear if you agree with me on this. Like, I feel like even when I liked what they were doing, how they executed it wasn't there, right? So, like, we've talked about before that I'll almost rather you run a non-ideal play at 100% speed and effort than, the perfect play for the perfect situation at 80%.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, like, I even noticed it in, as the first quarter started slipping away, where I'm like, well, we're just kind of getting, like, these lackadaisical threes up. Like, they're kind of open. It's not bad inherently, but, like, there's just a lack of crispness associated with it. And so, but with that said, like, I do think this is kind of where I go to my next point, Justin. I just thought this team really played into OKC's hands. They had some good sets. Donovan got some clean looks. Darius was able to turn the corner whenever he wanted. Jarrett was catching the ball deep and able to finish. Evan was getting good deep catches. And I felt like they just kind of stopped doing that. It's probably the first game of the year that I got a bone to pick with, how the rotations went. Jarrett plays 16 minutes and Evan plays 18. Dean plays 25. And that's not because of garbage time.
Yeah.
They played I felt like at the first sign of adversity, they went to small ball. And I just can't think of I just don't believe that was going to work against this version of OKC. If Hartenstein was in, I would have been more into small ball against this team, because one of the things I love most about this team, Justin, is that what they do, when they impose what they do onto other teams can't match. That's what the first game was. It was the two bigs beating, just bludgeoning them over and over and over again with their playmaking, with their size, with their decisiveness. And, one of the reasons you typically go small against any opponent is you want more playmaking on the floor. You want more dribbling, but Dean at the 5 isn't giving you more playmaking or dribbling. He's not ungunking anything for you the way that, some teams can do when they go small. Like if Boston wants to go really small, well, they got like 5 guys who can dribble and and can attack in a pick and roll and things like that. The same thing with this OKC team when they put Jay Will on the bench. Like, I just didn't think that was the right move, and I felt like it felt like a bit of it was an instant impulse, but it didn't really stop either. Like, it wasn't bearing fruit, and we kept trying it. And meanwhile, Jarrett and Evan combined for 13 field goal attempts. I just feel like there wasn't a lot of game plan discipline in getting them the ball and getting them chances to succeed, because like even in that third quarter, Jarrett gets like 3 easy rim attacks in a row off of slips where he catches and immediately step up for a layup. And like, I just was like, where was that the whole game?
Yeah, and this is one of those tricky things about doing a post-game podcast rather than when we do the next day, because so often that second watch is when, okay, let me go back to see how I feel on a rewatch of what I was seeing the first time. I know how I felt in real time, because when they went small with Dean, my first reaction was, I don't know about this, but then, they had that 8-0 run, right? And that was primarily fueled by Garland. Garland had that terrific second quarter.
Yeah, to me, that was just Darius being great. He was probably the only Cav who had a good game tonight.
Right. And the thing about the theory of small ball and being able to play with mobility at the 5 and whatnot, what makes the Cavs unique is Evan and Jarrett are able to play that way, right? Like, they play that small ball, skill ball style with size. They have the mobility on both ends of the floor. They have the playmaking chops, especially when you talk about, the kind of curve of playmaking when it comes to the center position. I think both of those guys are very strong in that spot. So, I do think that this is going to be a bit of a feeling out process when it comes to the rotation. Our buddy Adam Eden, loyal listener of the podcast, has been tracking this for years. This was just the second time since October 2021 that the Cavs had their full rotation available.
I was really excited for that stat after a win, less so after a drubbing.
But I do think that there is going to be that feeling out process for Kenny, right? Of, okay, well, now that I do have everybody available, what's the best way to deploy them? What's the way to deploy them that gives me the most optionality in terms of how I'm going to use my rotation, right? Like, you might have a set number of minutes in mind for a certain player, but putting a guy in one spot of the rotation, whether that's, as the starter, whether that's using them as a 6th, 7th, or 8th man, that has ripple effects in terms of, okay, as I'm flowing through my rotation, as I'm going to, my various stagger combinations, it's not just about who fits well in that first sub. It's the substitutions that impacts down the line. And we've talked about that at length with, the argument of who starts at small forward, because when Dean starts, you really do have to have Niang in the first three off the bench to give you that sub in the front court. Whereas,
and boy, was it not his game tonight.
Right. And if you start someone else, you then have some optionality of, okay, I can start Dean. I can start, I can start.
Not start,
or
sub.
Niang, sub Dean or Niang, right? And same thing goes when you think of backup ball handlers, right? I thought Ty Jerome had a better game than Karras did coming in off the bench. How you kind of suss that out and who gets those first bench ball handling minutes, that's going to be something that Kenny has to feel out. So I do expect there to be some learning curve with that. But the spirit of what you said that I think is really important that shouldn't be overlooked here is, we've talked about this a lot, but when it comes to being a championship level team, which a result like this isn't going to change my opinion on that. The Cavs are absolutely a championship level team, but to bridge the gap, to bridge the experience gap between them and someone like Boston, who you have to beat to even get to OKC, you have to be able to impose your will, impose your style of play on the game. And usually the team that dictates the terms of engagement within a playoff series 4 out of 7 times, that's usually the team that gets to win, because teams are so talented in today's NBA that if you're letting them play their style with the way that every team is constructed slightly differently, if you are letting teams play in a style that is optimized to how their roster plays, and this is where our offense and defense is most comfortable, you're not going to win that game no matter how well you execute playing a different style. Playing Cleveland Cavaliers basketball, that gives them a chance to win versus any team. And I honestly, when you talk about the regular season right now, OKC and Cleveland have played at a level higher than anyone else. And OKC in particular, man, like that defense is going to kill you if you are not sharp, if you are not, getting them out of their groove in some way. And I thought the Cavs just didn't have the necessary sharpness and focus when it came to this matchup.
No, they didn't. And again, I do think, the next spot I'd love to go is the defensive end of the ball, where, they gave up 134. They should have given up 150. I mean, genuinely, if OKC's, garbage time players were hitting all the wide open threes they were getting, probably would have been 145, I thought it was the worst defensive game of the year.
I agree.
And
I mean, to put it plainly, Cavs scored 35 points in the second quarter. They scored 32 in the third quarter. Like, I'm obviously not going to count the 33 in the fourth because, nobody was playing in that. But, like, those 2 quarters, if you're having 35 and 33 point quarters against Oklahoma City, that should be what you expect.
Should be enough.
That should be your, hopeful output, right? Like, and they especially in that second quarter in particular, like they had a chance. Like they cut it down to, 15, 16 points. 15, 16 points in the second quarter, that gets overcome in a fourth quarter. That gets blown in mid-third quarter against the Indiana Pacers and turns into a blowout win for them, right? Like that is something that you can overcome. But I really felt like the defense was kind of scrambling early on. They gave Oklahoma City open shots, and that got them into a rhythm that they couldn't get them out of. Even when you started contesting those shots later in the game, they were in a group. That crowd is fantastic. Shai is, he's a tough shot maker, man. Like once he gets downhill, which I think he got downhill a little too easily. But like,
you think?
but yeah, he definitely got hit downhill too easily versus everybody. But like, even if you make him work, man, that guy's going to hit shots. So you can't allow him to have those easy buckets.
But I just thought across the board, every single Thunder ball handler turned the corner on every single Cavaliers defender.
Yeah.
There were a couple plays where the bigs like crunched an OKC player at the rim, and great. But for the most part, it was so like I talk about the shell defense and how you can get beat, and the Cavs are well equipped to protect you on the back end. You can't get beat that easy. You can't get beat off the third dribble. And I felt like that was kind of the whole game. Cason Wallace was turning the corner. Lou Dort was turning the corner. I get that Shai is going to get to his spots. He's the MVP of the league right now.
Yeah.
At least as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, Canada, baby. Look at you being biased.
Trust me, I am not biased in his favor. He's going to get to his spots. You can't let Cason Wallace turn the corner and walk.
Can't let Lou Dort.
You can't let Isaiah Joe walk to his spots. Like, I just felt like...
And I honestly, I think, sorry to cut you off again, but like, I think some of it was, you talk about the crispness on the offensive end. That is even more necessary when it comes to the zone, right? Like, and I thought that the zone execution and how they communicated within it, the structural integrity was all over the place. And I think that's when they were allowing that point of attack penetration, right? Like, because they were in a scramble in that zone. And, a scramble against a team, at least when you talk about guys like Lou Dort, Isaiah Joe, Cason Wallace, all very, very good players. But you're not talking about like supremely talented ball handlers at the level of like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or even J-Dub, right? Like you're making things a little too easily on them. And, that's probably going to be one of those feeling out processes too, right? Of, okay, we do believe that the zone is something that we can throw at teams. We can, show them different looks, get them out of the rhythm with this. But how much can we go to that and execute it at a high level with the burdens that are being asked in other areas, right? Like if we're going to play a very, high movement offense and we're going to play this style and we're going to, task guys to play straight up in man-to-man defense a lot of time. We're not going to bring help. We're not, we're really going to ask guys to do their job in the shell. If you're putting that much of a burden, what's the percentage of zone that's the sweet spot that we feel we can execute at a very, very high level? I think that's going to be another one of those feeling out processes because especially when you're integrating new pieces into the rotation again, that requires so much communication to be done at an effective level that, again, that is going to be one of those areas that is going to have a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, I think, how much zone is certainly an interesting question, but I also just wonder, like, structurally, why are you going to the zone? I felt like you watch Kenny's post game against Indy from Tuesday night, and he talks about how they wanted to go to the zone because it made it harder for Pascal Siakam to post. Mm-hmm. And Pascal was playing a great first half, and the zone basically made it so he just couldn't catch and bump and get to the looks that he wants to have. So that's a great use of the zone. I'm not sure I know what they were trying to do with their zone tonight. I'd almost, I'm not sure what it was taking away because they were going to it with Shai on the bench even, and like the reality is if you go to a zone and I'm not, who knows what the staff was. Obviously, we're just two schmucks sitting in our chair. But like
don't even have the benefit of a rewatch.
Yeah, we don't have the benefit of a rewatch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, bear in mind all those caveats. But like I felt like it was we're just not guarding well, so let's try to go to the zone. Our attention to detail and our compete isn't high enough. Let's see if the zone helps. It's like that's almost
honestly that's what Kenny said in the first OKC matchup. Like we were having trouble getting stops. We went to the zone and it was effective. So that that was probably part of the thinking. But I agree with your.
But if you're not, I just feel like it's a classic thing of like if you're not guarding well, if you're not communicating well, if you're not holding up at the point of attack, a zone is just going to expose that even worse.
Yeah,
because you got to work harder. You got to communicate better. So if your attention to detail and your effort level isn't where it needs to be on that end of the floor, it's just gonna like it's like shining a black light at it,
Yeah.
Like you're gonna see everything, and it definitely did not, it didn't play. But with that said, I don't think that I don't leave that game going. that's too much zone, I leave the game going, that team played a really bad defensive game.
Yeah, and it, as you said, it's a time and place thing, and you don't want to be working harder than you have to, which is why it's really helpful when you have tools like Zoom AI Companion, because only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion.
Yeah,
you're
man.
right though, man. Like you can't allow them to, you got to make them work. Especially OKC, we've seen them get bogged down at times offensively. We've seen other times where they get rolling. And, I think when it comes to someone like Shai, we've seen against like elite defenders that he can still go out and do this, right? Like I think back to, I watched the game against the Knicks, and he actually had a better game than he did against us. For like 39 points on 15 to 21 shooting. Tonight, 40 on 17 to 26. Like 1 point more on 5 shots more. And that's with OG Anunoby on him for every single minute. Mikal Bridges as an option. And like OG and Mikal Bridges, those are like those prototype guys where we're saying, built in a lab, the type of three that you'd love to see the Cavs add, 3-and-D, massive wingspan, massive size. Guys like that are going to be able to get theirs against the best defenders in the league, whether they're longer than them, whether, no matter what they do, they're still going to be able to get theirs. But making life easier for Isaiah Joe, Lou Dort, Cason Wallace, like that, you can't do that. That just puts you in too big of a hole to really overcome. And I really feel like that, that's where this game went wrong. Was that first quarter. As much as they made mistakes in the other quarters, I thought OKC just got so much momentum and they had such a cushion to play with. And when you are playing with that big of a cushion, you're going to feel more confident on both ends of the floor. You're going to feel more empowered to gamble for steals. Pulling for three is just going to feel better and better. Like
they have a nastiness about them too as a team. Like, I don't want to say front runner because that has the wrong connotation. But like they're a team that like they have a bit of that like old Warriors vibe of like they want to
cherish the beatdown.
Yeah, they want to put their boot on your neck, and I think you're 100% right on that. On the SGA front, like I mean he was phenomenal, and like he is going to have games like this where he's phenomenal. But like I do think there was like the attention to detail even went to how they guarded him. Like. Even with Okoro on him, a guy who prizes himself on like, hey, you might get yours, but you're going to have to work really hard for it. I don't think Shai had to work very hard for it. He walked to his spots. Not, He didn't have to get 3 screens or do a bunch of crazy, in and out dribbles or like do a tremendous amount of setup. For the most part, he dribble to the elbow, cook. And like that lack of, so much of guarding at this level happens before they get to the spot where they're getting ready to shoot, and making them chew up 6 extra seconds of shot clock to work to get to that spot. So if you do happen to cut it off, then all the other choices get short circuited, blah, 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 blah down the line. Like, I just don't think they were there. Now, like, obviously, this is a phenomenal game for Shai because even the possessions he did have to work, he also scored on. But I am not comfortable just chalking this up to you played the MVP. I'm not saying that's what you're doing.
Yeah, no. I clarifying that point, I think is a very good decision. I think that is, we don't want to get that misconstrued in any way, shape, or form. And I'd also caution people to not overreact or over-index to this game.
No, they played a bad game.
But as I said at the top, I do think, from a short-term next few weeks, hey, let's keep an eye on the Cavs thing. I think there's things that they need to iron out. I think the ball security has been a bit of an issue for a while. I listened to George Niang. He had a great interview with Carmen and Lima today where he was talking about, Indy was a bit of a wake-up call for us. Kenny's been emphasizing that we need to take better care of the ball. He said, when you haven't lost for 5 weeks, it's easy to get a little bit complacent throughout an 82-game season, and I think that some of that kind of set in. And we talked about this when they were going through the winning streak. We said, when they lost one game in like 6 weeks, right? We're sitting there being like, hey, you're going to have to play against the 82 games schedule to some extent. After they beat OKC, we said, hey, there's a risk of a letdown game here. Like you're battling against human nature at the same time. And I'm keeping an eye on the defense, but I'm not like concerned from a macro standpoint, because we do still have 2.5 years of data that says that this is a team that can play defense at a high level with this personnel. But, as you shift things over to the offensive end of the floor, as you try to round out the rotation, as you try to play different ways, as you try to, do things like implementing zone and all that, there's still going to be that feeling out process, right? Figuring out what you can and can't get away with. And I think the Cavs over the last week here have found out a couple times what they can't get away with. And it really is going to come down to, them committing on both ends of the floor, because I think that's what made this start so special is, you're not sitting there with a top 5 all-time player, one of the best ever in LeBron, or kind of these catalysts, these one-man engines that can propel you to these types of starts. It really was a collective, right? Like it really is a collective. I shouldn't talk in the past tense. It really is 4 guys playing at an all-star caliber level, sacrificing for one another. But just because they are sacrificing production, there was never that trade-off with effort, right? Like you were getting effort 100% of the time, whether that is playing off ball and, hey, I'm going to make a hard cut because that's going to open up an opportunity for someone else, whether that's defensive intensity and the communication. That effort was always there, and it was there 1 through 9, 1 through 10 in the rotation. I think it is human nature. I think it is understandable, but I do also think that it's worth pointing out when that isn't necessarily there.
Yeah, and I think concern about slippage. I know we're going to deep dive on the defense, I think, in our next episode, but it's got to be said, man. Last 10 games, they're 23rd in the league in defense.
And is that counting tonight? Because
it is indeed counting tonight. Which certainly helps throw the numbers. But I do, you're just not. I was thinking about that Boston win at the beginning of December and how much work it felt like Boston had to do to get a good look. And I do feel like and
that's a better offense.
Yeah, Toronto didn't have to work that hard. Indy
didn't have to work.
Indy didn't have to work that hard. Like I do think there's been some slippage, especially the last couple games. They're gonna have to try to clean that up a little bit. I do feel like we have to ask a question on the other side of the ball, though, Justin. Do we have a Donovan Mitchell problem against OKC? Because he is now 3 of 31. Or 6 of 31 against OKC this season. I mean, it only matters if they make the finals, I guess, because he's pretty good against everyone else. Like, if he didn't have huge games against other really good teams, I'd feel maybe a little more worried about a macro problem. But like, I don't think you can write this off as like a quickly solvable thing, because this OKC defense, even when it wasn't Dort, was giving Donovan fits.
Yeah, I think it's worth bringing up. I am, mindful of, hey, he did, pull his groin or go down in that Golden State game. So who knows if something's lingering there.
He was great against Indy, though, that second game.
He was, but,
I don't think he would tell you that.
I'm just saying, like, something to keep in mind, right? Like, I'm thinking back to even that stretch where we lost 4 of 10 games, which, when you have a start this good, sometimes it's easy to forget, hey, that did happen. We did go 6-4 in a stretch. When you have games in quick succession and you're in a bit of a lull, you're in a bit of a rut, it's tempting to make big kind of macro pulls from that. I do think that there's definitely something to him playing against Lou Dort. Like,
the Dort chamber seems to be real.
the career field goal percentage, at least when you're going by NBA.com tracking data, I think that's worth noting. I do think it's worth noting, though, when you look back to last year, there hasn't been a game where he has shot well against Lou Dort, right? When you look at the tracking data. But there was a game where he averaged, or not average, but he scored 43 points and he shot 56% from the field against OKC. Lou Dort played him in that game. Lou Dort held him to a very poor field goal percentage in that game, but he still scored 43 points on 27 shots, right? So I do think that it's possible. I do think Lou Dort is basically built in a lab to defend Donovan, because Donovan is such a physical player with how he plays offensively. And Dort is he's as wide as he is tall, right? Like he is a perfect square out there. Like he is absolutely built. He's going to stand his ground. Well, I shouldn't say he's going to stand his ground, because he is going to flop a few times, in fairness to him.
That one was crazy tonight.
He'll have some of those. I have to be honest about that. But, he is a very physical defender that can make life hell for just about anybody. But some of those open shots, the shots against other defenders, maybe he's thrown out of his rhythm in these games. I just don't know if that's something that I'm going to extrapolate beyond that, because I believe he even had a playoff series where he was very efficient against OKC early on in their careers, of course. But I just think even if the Dort minutes aren't going great for you, I think there are opportunities for him to cook on the other guys. Because even just looking at someone like Darius has had very efficient games consistently against OKC. And Dort isn't their only good defender. Cason Wallace, Wiggins, all those guys are very good defenders with length. Donovan's going to have a lot of opportunities against those guys too. And I expect Donovan to be better than he's been, against those guys so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a finals preview, I just don't, if this were a matchup in the finals, I just don't think you can win the series if Donovan shoots like this.
No, but I'd expect him to be better, right? Like
you certainly hope so. And
he's been in a little bit of a rut recently with efficiency. The Indy game was very good, but it has been a bit of a lull for him. And
yeah,
that's
15, 19, 11, 19, 35, and tonight 8.
Right. When you play a team twice in 8 days and you're going through one of those ruts that happens throughout the course of a season, it's something that can happen, right? Like I still fundamentally don't think there's anything unique about the Atlanta Hawks. I think that was, hey, we played them twice in 3 days. That was our 6-4 stretch of the season. Guys were a little under the weather, a little tired after the start that they had, how many games they played. I just don't know how much. I think it's a tough matchup for Donovan. I don't think it's as bad as it's been these 2 games. Is probably like my most concise way of saying that.
I think
talking.
I think that's a fair way to say it. It's just not going to be this bad because he's, conceptually he's not going to be smoking transition layups one-on-one.
Right.
Though they do have a lot of these big wide bodies, J-Dub, starter Jalen Williams has a great frame to guard Donovan. Kenrich Williams, long arms. Shai has long arms. I do think there are certain matchups where I watch and I go, Darius is just built to be good against this defense in a way that Donovan isn't, Like I do think.
So what's the separating factor there? Because I always think of Donovan as the better scorer there.
He certainly is. It's not often because Donovan's a better scorer than Darius, but every now and again I'll just watch certain personnel, and I kind of just see Darius as kind of the stop start, the quickness as opposed to the explosiveness. Fitting in tighter spaces, being a below the rim finisher all the time, because OKC just isn't going to give you the ability to rise up that often. Like you have to almost get the ball up in an unusual way against them. You don't always have your feet under you when you're going up and attacking. So I think maybe there's a little bit there that just makes this matchup a little bit better for Darius. I kind of felt like that at times against the Boston backcourt, like Drew on Darius versus Drew on Donovan. I'd almost rather have Darius attacking Drew.
He's had a lot of success against Drew.
Yeah, those kind of wide body guys. I think for whatever reason, I just kind of feel like Darius had a slightly better time against.
See, this is why I like talking basketball with you, man. Like I think the stop-start nature of his game and just like how violent he is with his crossovers and how like you gotta have hot feet when you're guarding Darius. I think that against these types of defenders, I get what you're saying, and I think I agree with it.
It's like in football where sometimes like the third down back just happens to vibe against the defense. Even though doesn't have a higher top end velocity, isn't as powerful as the starting back, but for whatever reason, kind of the Darren Sproles of the world, that just have quick feet and can change, are smaller, have less mass to move around, so they can just change direction a little bit easier. I think there's a little something to it.
Yeah,
but conversely, there's way more matchups that Donovan is the better scorer than Darius because he's just better.
Yeah, but we should also, give some shout outs to Darius because he's just been amazing this year.
He's been killing it.
My God, he's been good. I do think when I think of this game, it's part of what I love about basketball. Like it is such a momentum
game. This was not any part of that I loved about basketball watching this game.
Fair, but it's I don't fully agree just because this is what I find interesting, right? Like so often the game can be kind of a microcosm of what you go throughout a regular season, right? Like you don't want a 10-2 run turning into a 18-2 run or an 18-4 run or a 25-4 run. You don't want a 1 or 2 game losing skid to turn into a losing streak, right? Like it's all about how quickly you course correct, because that's going to give you an opportunity to maintain your position in the standings. It's going to allow you to maintain your position within a game of, hey, do I stay close enough? Do I stay connected enough that I can come back and win this game? We've seen that from the Cavs a lot, but I do think when we go to the playoffs, you're going to have games where things aren't working well for you. You're going to have games where teams come out and punch you in the mouth. And the question is going to be, do we do a good enough job of recognizing what we're doing wrong in game, make the necessary adjustments to stay connected long enough to give yourself a chance to win it, right? Because I think back to like, it looks so bad when you lose like this. But think back to 2013. We stomped the Knicks. We beat them down by 30 in a series where we looked like crap. We lost in 5 games. That is something that's still being held against us. And even within that series, we smoked them for a single game at home, right? When you had that
Think
momentum.
of the 2016 finals. How many games were ended up
That was going to be my next point. We lost game 2 by 33 points. Like almost every single game in that series was a blowout except for game 7, right? Like if you looked at any one of those games individually, if you look at game 3 when we smoked the Warriors, you'd say, oh, like if that was the first game you watched of the series, you would think that the Warriors are in a totally different league than the Cavs, that the Cavs, are by far and away the better team. That's going to happen. And it's just about whether or not you can stay connected, whether you respond quickly enough, whether, some of those games, I guarantee you there's going to be a playoff game this year where the Cavs get punched in the mouth, they do not stay connected, and, they lose by a good margin. But it's going to be, okay, do you respond well enough to the next game? And maybe you respond well. Maybe you're going from game 2 to game 3. You respond great. You come out, you win comfortably in game 3. Game 4, crap, we're down 15 in the first quarter. Do we let it get to 20 or do we cut it down to 10? Those are going to be kind of the micro adjustments with where the muscle memory and the experience that you build from situations like this, is going to come into effect. So I do. As much as I hate going through it in the moment, I'm not sitting here bummed out. I'm not worried about what this means in the macro, because to me, I've already seen enough. These are the lessons that I want to see. These are the tests. These are the lulls of the regular season where you learn a little bit about yourself, and it gives you the opportunity to reflect and adjust.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking about how, like while you're talking about the things you're not worried about, I was thinking like, well, what am I worried about? What are the things that you leave a loss like this worried about? And, like I think some of the things I really hammered on in this podcast was, going small as fast and as like pot committed as we were to that. And, I was disappointed by that because I really do think this team needed to figure out how to get control of the game with their bigs on the floor. With that said, every time Kenny has pushed the Dean Wade at the 5 button this year, it's worked. Every time. So it's like, much as we want to understand how they react and learn, like they also have to have some stuff not work so they can figure out what to take away from those failures. Like I always go back to, it's nice having a body autopsy. And, this game is almost rough to autopsy because so much went wrong that you don't want to pull too many individual conclusions away from it. But like, now, next time they're playing a team that's downshifting against them, getting handsy, is Kenny going to go back to the Dean at the 5 lineup? I'm going to learn, is that a foundational philosophy for him, or was he just trying stuff in a game that was getting away from him? Like we have a little bit more data to learn from. Whether I end up agreeing with the coaching staff's decision or not, first off, that doesn't matter. This is all subjective, and I'm certainly not smarter than the Cavs coaching staff. And at least about basketball, that's for damn sure. And in pretty much any other way, I'm probably not smarter than that.
I was about to say, nice little caveat there. You're just big upping yourself for no reason.
I'm just adrift at sea over here. Don't worry about it. I think I think whether or not I agree with them, it's important to learn what their values are. And you kind of learn, you see them tested, and now the next time, are they going to change what they do? Are they going to go back to that? Like, that's good information to have.
Yeah, and if we're bearing our souls here and talking about insecurities and things that you worry about with the team, like to me, the things I worry about with the Cavs are, I think we have 3 guys that have an argument to be top 20 players in the league. I really do believe that 4 guys that deserve all-star credit, and we have 3 guys that are going to be in all NBA conversations. And by nature, that makes you, in that top 20 mix.
In the realm of top 15.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I think those guys, like, obviously we have that level of talent, but you usually do need that top 5 player. And to me, that just means the margins are thinner, right? Like you have to execute at such a high level when you are running a lot of your offense through 2 smaller guards. You got to make sure that everything is crisp, that those guys are strong with the ball in their hands, that they're not rattled, that they're not, going to be deterred by length and strength. I think that they really responded, to that situation well throughout the season. But the margin is what scares me, right? That they do have to perform at such a high level in order to, overcome that. To me, that's also the fun part of this, right? Like, because I love that they have shown that they can do that this year. But I think games like this, I think what we have seen recently is kind of just that reminder of how well they have to play, how focused they have to be, how special they have to be in order to overcome that and, come together to win a championship. So I would rather this occur in the regular season. I would rather these reminders occur in these situations than, hey, not really tested ever in the regular season. They cruise to, a franchise best wins record. And in the playoffs, all of a sudden physicality ramps up and, they adjusted to it, but they didn't adjust quick enough, and they put themselves in a bit of a hole, and it ended up in a disappointing series. I think that this team has been through a lot of failures already. I think they've learned a lot of lessons from them. That's what makes this so much damn fun. And that is both my fear, and that's also what makes it so exciting for me from an analysis standpoint. So, I think these reminders are helpful, but, I don't want too many of them. Let's sprinkle in one a month or whatever, and keep the good vibes going overall. But I do think when we're sitting here and it's after one of these games, I think that's the type of stuff that's important to highlight.
Yeah, much like my children, I don't like being forced to eat food that's good for me too often. Let's get back to cupcakes and milkshakes, brother.
Cupcakes and milkshakes, baby. Well, certainly got a lot to talk about. I really fumbled, man. I normally do a great job of seeing when the Cavs play in Minnesota on a Saturday. I totally, this one just kind of slipped my mind.
I love that you consider a 7-hour drive, just a hop, skip, and a jump.
Well, here's the thing. It's a 7-hour drive, and I've done it once in a blizzard. We got a blizzard coming in this weekend. It's the highway driving, interstate driving is a little bit sketchy, but that is a hop, skip, and a jump. You're right. That is just the realities of living where I live. But I really fumbled the bag there. But at least, get a cozy up, talk some Cavs hoops on Sunday. Looking forward to doing that with you. We got a lot to talk about still, some things that we weren't able to get into in this podcast, some macro things. We'll talk about the Wolves game and pregame the upcoming week. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live after this loss. We really do appreciate you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.